Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Okay, let's see. Matsyo Yukanta Samaye Manunupalapta.
Matsyo Yuganta Samaye Manunopalabdha.
Joni Mayo Nikila Jivani Joni Mayo Nikila Jivani Kaya Ketam
Shoni Mayo Nikila Jiva Nikaya Ketam.
Vishram Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme
Vishram Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme.
Adaya Tatra Vijahara Veda Margan
Tatra Vijayara Veda Margam.
Matsyo Yukanta Samaye Manunopalapta
Matsyo Yuganta Samaye Manunopalabdha.
Joni Mayonikila Jiva Nikaya Keta
Shoni Mayo Nikila Jiva Nikaya Keta.
Vishram Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme
Vishram Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme.
Adaya Tatra Vijahara Veda Margan
Adhaya Tatra Vijahara Veda Margam.
Would anyone else like to recite the verse?
Matsyo Yuganta Samaye Manunopalabdha. Matsyo Yuganta Samaye Manunopalabdha. Shoni Mayo Nikila Jiva Nikaya Keta. Shoni Mayo Nikila Jiva Nikaya Keta. Vishram Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme. Vishram Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme. Adhaya Tatra Vijahara Veda Marga. Adhaya Tatra Vijahara Veda Marga. Matsyo Yuganta Samaye Manunopalabdha. Matsyo Yuganta Samaye Manunopalabdha. Shoni Mayo Nikila Jiva Nikaya Keta. Shoni Mayo Nikila Jiva Nikaya Keta. Vishram Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme. Vishram Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme. Adaya Tatra Vijahara Haveda Marga. Adaya Vijahara Haveda Marga.
Matsyo Yukanta Samaye Manunopalabdha.
Matsyo Yukanta Samaye Manunopalabdha.
Shoni Mayo Nikila Jiva Nikaya Keta.
Shoni Mayo Nikila Jiva Nikaya Keta.
Vishvam Sitanurubhaye Salile Mukanme.
Vishram Sitanurubhaye salile mukhanme.
Adaya tatra vija ava aveda margam.
Adaya tatra vijahara vedamargam.
Matsyo yuganta samaye manuno palapta.
Matyo yuganta samaye manuno palapta.
Shoni mayo nikila jiva nikaya ketam.
Joni mayo nikila jiva nikaya keta.
Isram sitanu baye salile mukanme.
Ishram sitan urubaye salile mukanme.
Adaya tacha vijaharaha vedamargan.
Adaya tatra vijahara vedamargan. No one else there?
Ramachandra's here, but it looks like he's not going to chant the verse.
No.
He's with you in person?
Yes.
Aha, okay. Matsya,
Matsya.
incarnation of the fish.
Incarnation of the fish.
Yuganta,
Yuganta.
at the end of the millennium.
At the end of the millennium.
Samaye,
Samaye.
at the time of.
At the time of.
Manuna,
Manuna.
the would-be Vaivasvata Manu.
The would-be Vivasvata Manu.
Upalapta,
Upalabdha.
seen. Kshonimaya,
Shonimaya.
up to the earthly planets.
Up to the earthly planets.
Nikila,
Nikila.
all.
All.
Jiva,
Jiva.
living entities.
Living entities.
Nikaya Keta,
Nikaya Keta.
shelter for.
Shelter for.
Vishram Sitan,
Vishram Sitam.
emanating from.
Emanating from.
Uru,
Uru.
great.
Great.
Vaye,
Ahe.
out of fear.
Out of fear.
Salile,
Salile.
in the water.
In the water.
Mukat,
Mukat.
from the mouth.
From the mouth.
Me,
Me.
mine.
Mine.
Adaya,
Adaya.
having taken to.
Having taken to.
Tatra,
Tatra.
there.
There.
Vijahar,
Vijahara.
enjoyed.
Enjoyed.
Ha,
Ah.
certainly.
Certainly.
Vedamargan,
Vedamargan.
all the Vedas.
All the Vedas.
Translation. At the end of the millennium, the would-be Vaivasvata Manu of the name Satyavrat would see that the Lord in the fish incarnation is the shelter of all kinds of living entities, up to those in the earthly planets. Because of my fear of the vast water at the end of the millennium, the Vedas come out of my Brahma's mouth, and the Lord enjoys those vast waters and protects the Vedas. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. During one day of Brahma, there are 14 Manus, and at the end of each Manu there is devastation, up to the earthly planets, and the vast water is fearful even to Brahma. So in the beginning of the would-be Vaivasvata Manu, such devastation would be seen by him. There would be many other incidents also, such as the killing of the famous Sankasura. This foretelling is by the past experience of Brahmaji, who knew that in that fearful, devastating scene, the Vedas would come out of his mouth. But the Lord in his fish incarnation not only would save all living entities, namely the demigods, animals, men, and great sages, but would also save the Vedas. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadyati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaita Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri... Oh, I lost the word. Can someone help? Bhagavad Gita can help.
Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Shah.
Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kantam Namostute Tapta Kanjana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishvabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evaja Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshattarini. So, I will share a little about my research I did. I love preparing for class. I love doing the research. I'm okay giving the class because I'm used to doing as a teacher, and I usually feel awful after giving a class. So yeah, I'll share from my journey. So a few days ago, I read from Srila Prabhupada that an ideal teacher is well-versed and realized in Vedic knowledge, and he knows where the audience is at. So I was really inspired by that, this balance. And I didn't realize that at that time that I was like putting pressure on myself. Like if I give class, I need to know a lot, I need to be realized, and I need to know where the audience is at. And I think that created the nightmare I had last night, where I woke up in the dream, and I was meant to give class, and I wasn't prepared. And everyone was already there, and I wasn't prepared. So, yeah, and I think that's what happens. I prepare, and I start to feel really smart. I know so much. And then I give class, and I want to share all the smart things. And then the realization comes, oh, there's so many things I don't know. And then I start to feel really like inadequate and shameful. And so that's my process around giving class. And still, I see it as practice. So I'm here giving, sharing, not as a teacher, but as a seeker. As a seeker, doing some research. So I was actually happy to get this verse about Matsya, because a few months ago I read about Matsya to my children. They were sick, and usually, like nowadays, they're not so much interested to hear about Krishna unless they are sick. And when they are sick, they want me to tell them about Krishna. So I told them about Matsya, and And I was so inspired about Matsya that I created a little book and gave it to my nephew. His name is Liam. And just today, he came with his mother to pick up my daughters. And I thought, oh, this is a coincidence. I'm going to speak about Matsya. And I gave him a book, a little book about Matsya. Because at that time, it was his birthday, and he got a fish. And he showed me this fish, and I said to him, oh, does the fish have a name? And he said, no, it doesn't have a name. And I said, do you want to give him a name? And he said, yes. Do you know a name? And I said, yes, Matsya. I'm just reading out about a fish, and his name is Matsya. So his fish that he takes to bed every night is called Matsya. And now he has this little book about Matsya. And when he came today, I said, oh, it's very interesting because today I get to speak about Matsya. And he was like, oh, Matsya, yes. So that's the little conversation, the little Srimad Bhagavatam talk I had today with my nephew about Matsya. Yeah, so I thought to share a little about Matsya. Matsya, he appeared. There was King Satyavrat, and he went to the river every day to do his ritual washing and prayers, and one day this fish came into his hands, and he was a little like annoyed, and he put the fish back. The fish would come back into his hands and said, take me with you, take me, you have to protect me because the waters, they are so scary, there are big fish and sharks and I need protection. And so the king decided to take the fish home, and he put him in a glass. And after a very short time the fish grew and the glass was too small, so the king put the fish into a bigger container. And the fish just continued to grow, and it grew to such a size that the king took him to a lake and then later to the ocean, and at the ocean the fish just increased in size again. And Satyavrat realized, oh, you're not an ordinary fish, you must be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he said, yes, I am. And very soon there's going to be a big flood. And when there's this big flood, I want you to be aware, awake, and because at that time a big boat is going to come. And I want you to go into this boat with the 7 sages, 9 sages, 7 sages. So the 7 sages, and with take some of each living entity with you, and go into this boat, and then the waters, they will just increase, and then I will come as Matsya, and then I ask you, or I don't know. Bind the boat to me as a fish. I will have a big golden horn, and I will protect you and everyone in the boat. So I love this story, and I think part of it because it reminds me of Noah's Ark, and I grew up with the Christian culture, with the biblical stories. So I took the Bible and I thought to read again about Noah's Ark, and it was quite interesting because first of all, I was surprised to read about Noah's age. So it's described that Noah, he was 600 years old when the flood came. So when he built the ark, he was 600 years old. And Noah also, he was, like he heard from God that there will be a flood, and that he's like the chosen one, he's the one to survive the flood, together with his wife, his 3 sons, and the wives of his sons. And he was also asked to take a couple of each living entity into the ark. So a lot of similarities, and a lot of questions that came up for me. So according to the Bible, Noah was 600 years old, which means, if I compare it to Srimad Bhagavatam and the description of the different yugas, that Noah, it happened in a different yuga. It happened in Dwapara yuga. Like, that's my conclusion.
Yeah, it would be right towards the end of Dwapara, beginning of Kali. And so, just what you're saying, like, so Dwapara Yuga, like, people were living like 1,000 years, and then as Kali comes on, it diminishes to 100. So that whole kind of Noah pastime, Noah in the ark, would happen right around, according to the Vedas, when people were living about 600 years. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And he continued to live another 350 years after the flood. And also, what's interesting is that in this Bible, it said that, and then God, he said, from now on, men will only live to 120 years, which is interesting. And then there's many, like, what I found interesting is that in the Bible, Noah, he takes his wife with him. It's not described in Srimad Bhagavatam whether Satyavrat took his wife with him or not. It's not. I didn't find anything about that. So Matsya appeared at the beginning of the life of the current Manu. Like, that's this. So Satyavrat, he survived this flood, and then he became the Manu of this age. And and further, I read in the Bible that God promises at the end, like at the end of the flood, and then all the water dries up, and this whole event takes 1 year, which doesn't seem very long. But according to the Bible, it's 1 year, because in Noah's 601st year, he was again on dry land. And then God, it's described that God made a pact with his people, with Noah, that there will never be another flood again. Which got me thinking, because in Srimad Bhagavatam it's described that every time, at the end of every Manu's life, there is a flood. So it seems that's a repetition, it's a cycle, it happens again and again and again. And so I was wondering, like, where does the pact come from, that God promised never to send a flood again? And it's, for me, it's a very relevant question, because it's a question I had as a child. I was quite scared of this flood, and hearing that there will not be another flood, that God will not send another flood, was like a great relief for me. And so this is all coming alive again. I'm thinking, okay, so where does this come from the Bible? And it got me thinking about the Old Testament, the view. I read again, how do they see God? How do they describe God? And in that incident with Noah, God is described in a very personal way. He's a person with feelings. But the feelings he has, it's like revenge. He regrets having sent, that's the words used here. God regretted having sent human beings to earth. He regretted having sent the living entities to earth, and therefore he is sending the flood to kind of make up for this mistake. And so there's this view of God is revengeful, and then the pact is like, oh, God makes peace with human beings again. And you say, oh yeah. And I thought, well, perhaps that's and it feels risky for me to say this, but perhaps that's like an incomplete view of God, or a childlike view of God, like a view I still carry in me, this view of God as someone to be afraid of. He's revengeful. He might punish, and he'll have regrets, having said that I am here, are just like this childish, maybe childish image, view of God. And then a promise is like, yeah, I will not send this again. It's like appeasing for a child. It's not going to happen again. And then I thought of Bhagavad Gita, and that perhaps it's not that the Bible, that it's not to say, well, it's just not true would be very easy. What's in the Bible is just not true because there's so many questions and so many things I'm not understanding. And I thought of Bhagavad Gita, that where Krishna describes, like we hear about his universal form, and it's not only pretty, it's not all loving. I mean, it is, but not in the way that I consider, like, yeah. It's not all flowers and fairies and peace. So, and Krishna says, like, I am death personified, I'm all-devouring death, I'm time, something about time, destroying, like the destroyer. So that's also God. So the view that the Old Testament has on God as revengeful, there's perhaps truth to it, or there is, I would say now, today, this moment, that there's truth to it, truth to it, or it's consistent with what Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam describes, yet it's not the full picture. And it's perhaps still, it's on the platform of right and wrong, of duality. It's looking at God with with the eyes of duality and not with the eyes of eternity. Some I don't know how to say. It's like the eyes of duality. What comes to my mind is this story about a king who he had a minister, and whatever happened, the minister was a very wise person, and whatever happened, the minister would say to the king, "Oh, it's all good, it's all good." And so the king was okay with that until he got bitten by a snake, and he needed to go to bed, and like he had all this poison in his body, and his minister said, "Oh, it's all good, it's all good." And then the king got really upset, and he put the minister to prison. And when the king felt a little better, he went on a horse ride in the forest, and he got caught by some man-eaters, and they took him back, and they had a big pot of oil on the fire, and they were going to cook him. And then someone saw that he had a snake bite, and then they said, "Oh, he got bitten by a snake. We shouldn't eat him. We should send him back home." And they sent the king back home. And on his way back home, the king realized that the minister was really, he was right. It was good that he got bitten by a snake. And he started to feel really bad for having sent him to prison. And he went home, and he went to the prison, and he said, "Well, I'm really sorry I put you into this prison. I shouldn't have done it. And the minister said, "Oh, it's okay, it's good." And then the king was really confused. He said, "Why is it good? I sent you to prison, it was cold, and you didn't get proper food." And the minister said, "Well, just imagine, I follow you wherever you go. So had I been with you in the forest, the man-eaters, they would have taken me instead of you, and they would have cooked and eaten me." And so the king realized, oh yeah, it's all good. So it's this platform of good and bad. But actually, how can we say what is good and what is bad? Like with our view, the view of duality, we're not able to judge what's good and bad. And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna advises us, Arjuna and us, to move beyond. To move beyond. And there's a poem by Rumi, from the Sufi tradition, Muslim Sufi tradition, and there's one line where he says, "There is a field beyond right and wrong. There is a field. I'll meet you there." And I find that those two lines so rich, deep in wisdom, and it came to my mind connected to this how do we see God, and how does the Bible see God, and how does Srimad Bhagavatam describe God, how does Srimad Bhagavatam describe Krishna? So, and then I continued to read or think about what am I reading. So what stood out for me is that Brahma, during Brahma's one day there are 14 manus. And at the end of each manu there's this devastating flood. So it means 14 times a day Brahma experiences this flood. And each time he is scared. So according to this this verse here, because of my fear of the vast water at the end of the millennium, the Vedas come out of my Brahma's mouth. And at first I was surprised. So Brahma experiences this 14 times a day, and each time he is scared. So I felt like, wow, I can be scared of things that I experience again and again and again. So even Brahma is scared of something he experienced again, and he knows, the Lord will come as a fish, and at the same time he's fearful. So that stood out for me. And I thought, well, perhaps that's like a game between Brahma and it's like a game, a play. Brahma gets scared, and then Krishna comes and he gets peaceful again. And then something else is mentioned in the purport. And there would be many other incidents also, such as the killing of the famous Sankashura. This foretelling is by the past experience of Brahmaji. And then it goes on. So Brahma explains something about the future that he has already experienced in the past. And I didn't know who Sankashura is, so I went to read about Sankashura. Actually, I just entered Sankashura in Vedabase. And the first verse I discovered, or the first indication, is nectar of devotion. And it describes, it's in chapter 44. The chapter is called Devotional Service in Conjugal Love. So I was curious. So there's an Asura. The title is like, Conjugal Love. And then there's this Asura. So I'll read this one paragraph. Or the paragraph before starts, the conjugal love of Radha Krishna is never disturbed by any personal consideration. And there are different instances where Prabhupada brings together or he summarizes or incites and different incidents, how this love is never disturbed. And he writes, on one side of the courtyard, the dead body of Sankasura was lying, surrounded by many jackals. On another side were many learned Brahmins, who were all self-controlled. They were offering nice prayers, which were as soothing as the cool breeze in summer. In front of Krishna, Lord Baladev was standing, causing a cooling effect. But even amid all these different circumstances of soothing and disturbing effects, the lotus flower of ecstatic conjugal love that Krishna felt for Radharani could not wither. So this love of Krishna for Radharani is often compared to a blooming lotus. The only difference is that Krishna's love remains ever increasingly beautiful. And then the other paragraph is from chapter 47, also Nectar of Devotion, and the title is Compassion and Anger. So in the part of compassion, there is the mention of Sankashura. Similarly, when Sankashura demon was attacking Krishna's queens one after another, Lord Balaram became more and more bluish. So I have no idea what that means. I'm just sharing with you the research I did and what I found. And then, interestingly, not in Veda base, but entering Sankashura in Google, I came across Krishna book. And in Krishna book, in the 34th chapter, there is described who Sankashura is. So I'll read. It's actually, the title is Vidyadhar liberated and Sankasura killed. So there's this incident with Vidyadhara, and after this, Krishna and Balaram, they went to the forest with the gopis, and they were playing and dancing and singing. And then, I'll read, at that time, while they were so much absorbed, almost in madness, a demon, associate of Kuvera, the treasurer of the heavenly planets, appeared on the scene. The demon's name was Sankashura, because on his head there was a valuable jewel resembling a conch shell. Just as the two sons of Kuvera were puffed up over their wealth and opulence, and did not care for Narada Muni's presence, this Sankashura was also puffed up over material opulence. He thought that Krishna and Balaram were two ordinary cowherd boys, enjoying the company of many beautiful girls. Generally, in the material world, a person with riches thinks that all beautiful women should be enjoyed by him. Sankasura also thought that, since he belonged to the rich community of Kuvera, he, not Krishna and Balaram, should enjoy the company of so many beautiful girls. He therefore decided to take charge of them. He appeared before Krishna and Balaram and the damsels of Braja and began to lead the girls away to the north. He commanded them as if he were their proprietor and husband, despite the presence of Krishna and Balaram. Being forcibly taken away by Sankasura, the damsels of Raj began to call the names of Krishna and Balaram for protection. The two brothers immediately began to follow them, taking up big logs in their hands. Don't be afraid, they called to the gopis. We're coming at once to chastise this demon. Very quickly they reached Sankasura. Thinking the brothers too powerful, Sankasura left the company of the gopis and ran for fear of his life. But Krishna would not let him go. He entrusted the gopis to the care of Balaram and followed Sankasura wherever he fled. Krishna wanted to take the valuable jewel resembling a conch shell from the head of the demon. After following him a very short distance, Krishna caught him, struck his head with his fist, and killed him. He then took the valuable jewel and returned. In the presence of all the damsels of Braj, he presented the valuable jewel to his elder brother Balaram. So that's what we learn about Sankasura from Krishna book, from Srila Prabhupada. So, doing all this research and not knowing what is not understanding, like why would Srila Prabhupada mention Sankasura connected to Matsya? I don't know. But still, like reading this and doing the research, I got a lot of I spent time reading the Bhagavatam, Nectar of Devotion, Krishna book, and I got more understanding, perhaps, hopefully, about Krishna and how one thought or one inspiration that came to me is that, like a theme for me, and perhaps it's just my theme, and I see it in this verse and purport and what I read, is that Prabhupada he's supporting us to be in blissful Krishna consciousness. That's what he wants, where he wants to guide us to be in blissful Krishna consciousness all the time, every moment in our life. And despite what's happening outside, despite what's happening, like, and outside, I mean starting with my mind, despite what my mind is doing, what my senses want, what my immediate surrounding, like my family or the weather or the other living entities, what they are doing or what they're bringing towards me or challenging me about. Despite the pandemic situation, viruses, despite all the suffering, all the wars, all the confusion, all the chaos, all the beauty also, all the beauty in this world. At least for me, the beauty in this world is I experience it very intense, and it can be so like intoxicating. It can be like we speak a lot about living in drama or living in conscious living, being in that consciousness of, like, to be in the consciousness of conscious living, or the drama of life. And I see that also beauty is, like, I live in a very beautiful place, and it can become like a distraction. The beauty can become a distraction. And so what I get from this verse and Srila Prabhupada and what he mentions, and when I go after that, Sankasura, Krishna book, he speaks of conjugal love, like the highest love of God, blissful Krishna consciousness. and at the same time there's this demon. So there's the gopis, there's the forest, and it's all there, and perhaps that's a message. I don't know if that's a message that's being sent, but it's a message I receive, like an encouragement to be in this blissful Krishna consciousness, to always connect with the place in me that is singing the Maha Mantra. Like even if life feels torturous or painful or very beautiful. And I'm actually reading this book I shared last Friday. Malini inspired me to read this book by Walter Chischek. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He leadeth me. So it's this priest who got sent to the prison, the work camp in Siberia and Russia. And it's just amazing to me what the consciousness, or he describes his purification, like the prison, he describes it as the purgatory. Like he got so much of his, like what he thought was his spiritual realization, everything just got crushed. And he realized how arrogant he was, how self-centered he was, how much he was putting up the mask of a spiritual person. It all got crushed in this prison, and he came to a place of surrender and humility, seeing every moment in this prison. And I try to imagine, but it's just the first 5 years he spent in a prison. They were interrogating him and trying to get him to commit that he's a spy. Espionage spy, yeah. And 5 years he spent in a room, everything just stone wall, whitewashed, one bed and one toilet bucket, nothing to read, nothing to write, nothing to listen to, just total silence. And even the guards, they had matted shoes so no one would hear them. And there's a big like eye in the door where someone can look in, but he couldn't see out. So that's how he spent 5 years, just every day, same, no input, no, except interrogation sometimes, but sometimes not, for months. And he started to see every moment as this is God's will. And this moment is a gift for me, and it's an opportunity for me to serve God. He came to this realization, and then he later went to labor camps, and he continued to practice this view. And then I got to the question of, well, perhaps inside life, perhaps there's a point on our spiritual journey where the inside life is totally not disconnected, but like the outside life becomes irrelevant to the inside life. Like outside it can be like wonderfully, heavenly, beautiful, or it can be hellish tragedy, and it doesn't affect the inside place of blissful Krishna consciousness. And then the question came up for me, so what about Biddu have? So does it mean when I'm in blissful Krishna consciousness, I do what Krishna conscious, blissful Krishna conscious people do, and I'll have, I don't know, I'll have the result of being crucified or being put to prison? Not very attractive. So that's where my research ended. Yeah. No, actually it didn't end there. Well, it did end because I mean, I'm laughing now, but it's quite, when I'm serious about it, I get quite emotional. Like, yeah, it's scary. It's really scary for me. So I thought, what to do? What can I share with you, other than this not very happy ending of my research? So I found, Martin, you're laughing. You probably think it's a happy, it's an auspicious end. I get to search more. What came to my mind was, there is this song about the different avatars of Krishna, and I went to find it, and I want to sing the first line to you, because the first line is about Matsya. So maybe I can share it and you can sing along. I'll try. I didn't prepare, so it's quite small, but maybe you can see. And you can sing along. Wait. So I'll read the translation first before we sing. O Keshava, O Lord of the universe, O Lord Hari, who have assumed the form of a fish, all glories to you. You easily acted as a boat in the form of a giant fish, just to give protection to the Vedas, which had become immersed in the turbulent sea of devastation. Pralaya payodi jala, pralaya payodi jale dritavan, asivedam vihita, vahitra charitram akedam, keshavadrita namina sharira, Jai Jagadisha Hare, Jaya Jagadisha Hare, Jai Jagadisha Hare. Pralaya payodi jale dritava anasivedam vihita vahitra charitram akedam keshavadrita mina sharira Jai Jagadisha Hare, Jai Jagadisha Hare, Jai Jagadisha Hare. So whenever we get lost in the Vedas and trying to understand, we can go to the verses and we can stop. Okay, we can go to the verses and sing the verses. At the end of the millennium, the would-be Vaivasvatamanu of the name Satyavrat would see that the Lord in the fish incarnation is the shelter of all kinds of living entities, up to those in the earthly planets. Because of my fear of the vast water at the end of the millennium, the Vedas come out of my Brahma's mouth, and the Lord enjoys those vast waters and protects the Vedas. Hare Krishna. So I look forward to hearing from you, comments, questions, answers, whatever.
Hare Krishna Anandini.
Hare Krishna.
I really enjoyed your class. I liked you referencing the Bible and singing songs. Thank you for class. I have a question about time. Like there's 14 Manus in one day of Brahman. There's destruction at the end of each Manu. I only knew about destruction on the night of Brahma and at the end of Brahma's life. Yeah, can you say anything else about what that timing of 14 Manus is per day of Brahma? Maybe you don't know, but that's what I'm curious about.
I can say that I have read about it, and I have asked Dear Govinda about it, and I have made notes about it, and I still don't remember. There are different kinds of destructions that stayed with me. Partial destructions and then complete destructions, and I think Dear Govinda can say more about that. Would you?
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Yeah, thank you for your class, Anandini, and for your question, Azay. First, I want to address something else because it would seem strange. Like, why is? I mean, it's certainly a very moving pastime with Shankasura and the gopis and Krishna, but why is Prabhupada putting that here? So I think I have a response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that refers to later in this chapter, because in this chapter, Brahma, he's describing the different incarnations. So at some point in this chapter, as we go on, Brahma is going to describe, and Krishna and Balaram appear. Because there's the source of all incarnations, Krishna. And then Brahma, he goes, and this is later in this chapter, so we'll be getting into it the next few weeks. Then Brahma described some of the pastimes of Krishna with Kaliya and Mother Yashoda, and Brahma, one of the pastimes he describes is about the Shankasura and the gopis and like that. And so it's somewhat random that Prabhupada includes it here. Prabhupada could have said about the Kaliya snake or something else. But Prabhupada is, he's just making the point that Brahma is Brahma he's seeing into the future because he knows the past, because these past times are secular. And Brahma has experience from previous days of Brahma and like that. So Prabhupada just saying, not only does he foresee what's going to happen with Matsya Avatar and King Satyavrata based on the past, he can also see the future pastimes like with Krishna and the Sankasura demon. And that's what's happening here in that purport. Okay. And so the thing about devastations and destructions, yeah, it's a bit complex. And yeah, it very much, I mean, there are the details of the question, and maybe I'll mention something, based on what I've heard from Prabhupada, but it relates to what you were speaking about, Anandini, about the Bible. And so sometimes Prabhupada gives, of course, there's also the question of how much of what goes in the name of the Bible has actually come down in an authorized fashion, hasn't been changed. But of course, the Bible itself, the teachings of Moses and Jesus are authorized apart from what has come down. And so Prabhupada will give the example, like there could be a very abridged dictionary, like maybe the sort of dictionary they'll give to 6-year-olds in school. And then there's the collegiate dictionary, there's the full dictionary, like that. And so this is like simplified version. And so like the Bible is, it's sort of like linear, like, it started at a point in time. I'll mention something I heard about the first words of the Bible in Hebrew are Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So Bereshit, my understanding of the translation, the actual translation would mean in a beginning, based on the conversational Hebrew I learned. In the beginning would be Bareshit, but it actually says Bereshit, which is in a beginning, which would indicate that the Bible's talking about this is one beginning. Okay. So it's sort of, the actual Hebrew indicates the idea of time being some very secular, cycles within cycles. Okay. So, yeah, so there's cycles within cycles, and so then there's there's like, okay, there's the big destruction of everything at the end of Brahma's life. That gets into time spans of 311 trillion, 40 billion Earth years. That's the duration of one exhalation of the Mahavishnu, and then that's 100 years for Brahma. So if we take the number of days in 100 years, which would be 365 100, like, and then at the end of each day of Brahma, then there's a partial devastation. Everything gets devastated, but not the very, very upper planets. Like even the heavenly planets get devastated, but not the Maharloka, Satyaloka, Janaloka. Okay, and then as we're discussing here, within each day of Brahma, there are 1,000 yuga cycles, and then 1,000 divided by 14 is about 72, and that's the lifetime of a Manu and an Indra, like that. And so at the end, there are some places where it's indicated that it's not necessarily that at the end of every Manu there's a devastation, but perhaps in this day for all 14 there are. So we could take, so a day of Brahma, yeah, so let's say a yuga cycle comes out to about 4,300,000 years. So times that by about 72, and then we get into about 300 million years. So then there's another type of devastation at the end of a Manu. There's another type of devastation, and so that's another cycle within a cycle. Even we can say that at the end of each Kali Yuga, 1,000 times per day of Brahma, there's a sort of devastation, not necessarily with big floods. So yeah, so a Manu is 72 Yuga cycles. It's about 300 million years, and there's, at least at most, if not all of them, there's a sort of devastation with a big flood, and many of them involve the Meena avatar or the Matsya avatar. And then there's a new Manu. Yeah, it's very fascinating here because this king Satyavrata, he's after his king life, he's going to become the next Manu. So yeah, there you go.
Okay, thank you for your answer, dear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you also know, dear Govinda, if Satyavrat, like, did he change his body to become the Manu, or is Manu like just that's the first father of a new human population?
My understanding is Satyavrata, yeah, my understanding is he got a change in body, like in his next incarnation, he became Manu. And then Manu, I mean, the English word man comes from Manu. And even if we look, the word mind and man, there's similar man, mind, Manu. So the idea is that mankind, is the only species that can consciously use their mind. It's the only species that can think, that's not just driven by animal impulses to eat, think, mate, and defend. Okay, so there's a connection between the English, the Sanskrit, mind, man. Other animals, they're pretty much just driven by bodily instinct. Man can think, and atato brahma jigyasa, what's the purpose of life, things like that. And so, so the Manu, who reigns for, again, 300 million years or so, along with others in different high posts like the Indra, and there's an incarnation, and there's an incarnation, special incarnation of Krishna during each period of Manu. And so the Manus are for establishing Dharma for human beings, and they are progenitors. We're reading, I'm reading now in the fourth canto. We've read in many cantos. So Swayambhuva Manu, the first Manu in this day of Brahma, he was a progenitor. His sons were Uttanapad, Priyavrata. His daughters were Prakuti, Akuti, and Devahuti. The current Manu, Krishna mentions him at the beginning of the fourth chapter, the Vaivasvata Manu, like that. So so the Manus are progenitors of humans, and the Manus are to establish Dharma in the human civilizations. As far as your depressing research, well, the way I see it, it's the Bee do have that, okay, we're being conscious spirit souls in service to Krishna, which is the core of our being. Service is doing, but it's also the core of our being. And so we do devotional service. And then we have the experience that devotees have, which is bliss and joy and empowerment and freedom and ever increasing nectar. And then that having energizes an even deeper experience of our being as spirit souls in connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which enthuses even more empowered devotional service, and then we have even a greater experience like that. So that's a encouraging view on the Bee do have. See, and the idea, okay, sure, we can look at examples of like Jesus or Chaichek. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. I'll call him Chaichek. And so, in the Russian prisons, and okay, sure, these are very godly people who went through so much. Srila Prabhupada went through so much, and Haridas Thakur went through so much, for sure. But that's to show the point that you were making, Anandini, that whatever the externals, our the internal consciousness of the spirit soul who's just sincere and dedicated to serve God is not affected. Whatever the externals, whether the externals are heavenly, or the externals are hellish torture, nothing can, nothing material can get in the way of that ever increasing loving devotional service of the devotional soul. And so, sure, we can say, oh yeah, but I don't want the externals that Walter Chaichek had or that Jesus had. But come on, we can also find hundreds of examples where the external life of a devotee of God is quite heavenly. And sometimes we can find so many examples of that. And whether in the Bhagavatam or in so many ways. And then the idea of, okay, here's the example of someone who's purely devoted to God and they're tortured and they have this hellish external. All right, well, that's to like move us to see how amazingly devoted they are. What an inspirational example of not just that amazing pure devotee personality, but of the power of devotion itself, that even Jesus is going through the torture we can't imagine, and he goes, yes, please forgive them. He's just connected with God. That's to move us, if we're ready to be moved to the power of devotional service. And at the same, just as a final point, you know, like if we're being spirit souls, devotees of God, awake, conscious, and we do things that devotees do, then naturally the lifestyle is more sattvic and more blissful, because we're not involved in all sorts of entangling, degraded material activities. So we have naturally a healthier life and like that. So we could focus on that side of it too. Examples like Chaichek, Jesus, Prabhupada having heart attacks crossing the Jaladuta, Prabhupada being in the cold in New York with no shelter. Okay, those are there for a particular reason, not to discourage us from giving our life to God, but to show us, wow, these are the most amazing personalities, and devotional service is so powerful.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Anything else? Anyone else?
Hare Krishna, Anandini,
Hare
and
Krishna.
everybody. Yeah, thank you for the lecture. I really like the soothed tone of like how you like give a class. It doesn't really feel like you're giving a class. It's just you're really openly sharing what's happening for you around this verse. I really like that. What stood for me is the quote you shared from Rumi, that I'll meet you beyond the fields of right and wrong, if I'm paraphrasing it correctly. And I'm just wondering, like, what is happening for you when, like, in terms of this quote, when you read, let's say, in like Prabhupada's, in the Krishna conscious literatures about things which are discriminating between right and wrong, or things like that for me like appear to be very like discriminating, like for example like man and woman issues, or ethnicities, or even like when I think the topic was raised around the different scriptures and comparing them, it sounds like discriminating in a sense, and I'm wondering what it brings for you, like in terms of that.
What comes to my mind when I hear your question is like, for me, it's an important consideration or discussion, right and wrong. I would say that this is important. Well, it's important for me. That, for example, I think it's wrong to abuse a child. I don't see anything right about that. I think it's wrong. And then at the same time, what I try to understand is the view that God has on this, Krishna has on this, that like in the totality, I don't know. It's not like looking at the law of karma, and it's not for me to say it's wrong. For some reason it exists, and this person, like, I don't know how to. Something that went through my mind was like, in looking at our victim stories, like I look at my victim stories, and things happen to me that I consider wrong. I consider this person did wrong to me. And then when I stay in this consciousness, only this consciousness, it's wrong that he did this to me, I feel quite powerless. And what helps me is to see a bigger picture of, okay, I still think it's wrong what this person did to me. And at the same time, perhaps consider that at some point in my life or on my journey, the journey of my soul, I did something which created the result that now I suffer. And I still consider what the person did is wrong. But it's no longer, there's a shift for me then in like adding the part of compassion and empathy and forgiveness towards myself and the other person. And then it seems there is another perspective which is beyond my ability to conceive, God's perspective on all of this. And I understand this poem as like it's beyond God's reality. God's love is beyond this discussion about right and wrong, victim or not victim. I don't know. Does it make sense to you?
Like you connect to the feeling of Krishna is loving us beyond whatever we perceive as right and wrong, or other perceive. You connect to that love.
Yeah, and what you say, like it's about discrimination. That's when I said it felt risky for me to speak about the Bible or the view of God that is described in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Bible has a lot of meaning to me and a lot of value, and has helped me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel able, I don't want to judge at the Bible. So I like Dhira Govinda's perspective that, yeah, there's a dictionary for 6-year-olds and there's a dictionary for students. I like to consider that perspective.
I think it will take me a while to connect to your answer, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mm.
So there's material distinction, and to the extent that one is making spiritual progress, then one becomes transcendental to material distinction. And there is spiritual distinction. There is spiritual distinction. And so a true devotee of God is making spiritual distinction and is rising above material distinction. Not seeing someone based on the body, not seeing someone as based on the body or the species or the color, the nationality. That's material distinction. Someone can be educated, not educated. That's material distinction. Devotional service is open and free for everyone, whatever one's material body. And at the same time, the spiritual distinction is like, yeah, it's all one. It's all the energy of Krishna. And then how can we sometimes quote, like, it is like a parent treats all their children equally by treating them differently. Right? So the parent loves all their children equally. And one child, they might be stern and maybe even give some discipline, and another child at a particular time, they might be very forgiving and generous, because the children at different times need different things, and it's all loving. And so similarly, a devotee makes distinction, always treating every spirit soul equally, whether they're in a body of this species, that color, that nationality, that age, always treating every spirit soul how can I support them in self-realization and Krishna consciousness? And for some spirit, like for a spirit soul in an animal body, we're not going to like bring them into the philosophy discussion, but maybe we'll bring them some prasad or let the trees hear kirtan. So the spirit soul in the tree is the same as the spirit soul of every one of us. That is every one of us, and so that's equal vision. We don't make material distinctions. And spiritually, how can I best relate to the spirit soul in the tree, the spirit soul who's the corporate business person, the spirit soul in the yoga community? How can I relate to them always equally to support them in their self-realization and devotional service? And the form will naturally be different, just like a parent will treat different children differently at different times, always from a consistent, equal, loving place. So it's the distinction between material distinction and spiritual distinction.
Thank you.
All right.
That responds better to you, Ramchandra's question.
Hare Krishna.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Thank you, Anandini. Hare Krishna.